Welcome to the Dreams of Consciousness podcast. If you'd be so kind, would you mind introducing yourself?
Vaedis Eosphorus from Vimur. I play guitar and vocals.
And Vaedis, how would you describe the music of Vimur?
So our goal with Vimur is to try to basically create sonically the sound of totality. And totality is everything. And our goal is to ascend, to descend, inward, outward, everything. We have moments of glory and triumph, but we also have moments of despair, melancholy, all of the things that would be associated with any type of grand battle or feelings of intense conflict, where there's rage, fury, but there's still a dark and depressing side to it. It's not just violence. It's a lot of melancholy and feelings of despondency.
Now, when you talk about rage and conflict, do you mean literally, like conflict in the war metal sense? Or is conflict a more abstract feeling in terms of your music?
More in the sense of abstract, but you could take it as both. But, spiritual warfare.
And I noticed you didn't use any genre descriptors like black metal or death metal or some of these terms that get ascribed to your music. How do you feel about those terms?
Well, I do think, I guess you could call us a black metal band, and we'd have a heavy death metal and doom metal influence in our music. Our goal is to try to create basically black metal rooted in traditionalism and, the classic stuff that inspired us, but also still take things to another level. I don't want to be a completely derivative band, but we don't want to be completely progressive where we neglect the roots. So yeah, I definitely feel a strong, camaraderie with black and death metal bands because that's what we are, but we're still trying to do our own thing while staying true to the roots of the genre.
We were speaking about your music and in terms of the philosophy that drives it, abstract, conflict. Are there philosophical aspects of black metal that you ascribe to or that influence your music?
Yeah, the two biggest things that would be running through our music, especially lyrically and conceptually, would be Luciferian Gnosticism. So
yeah, you're going to have to explain that for the listeners and for myself as well. I think everyone understands Luciferian. How do you describe Gnosticism?
Essentially, the way I see it, and I'm not saying that I'm the only, there's different threads within Gnosticism, but what I'm more drawn to is the feeling of, so in black metal's origins, there's a lot of anti-religious stuff, but it's like anti-God or whatever, but it kind of leaves you hanging. It just kind of ends there often, not always. But so the way I see it is that, yeah, there is a God above us, and it is malevolent. It is not in our best interest. It does not, it harms us, and we seek to go beyond that. We don't think that is what many people would refer to as God is not the true God, potentially a God, but not necessarily the source, if you will, because in nature, everything is hierarchical, and that applies to the spiritual realm as well.
And is this false god what's referred to as the demiurge?
Yeah. It is the god of the major three monotheistic religions.
Let's talk about Vimur as a band. Can you tell me how Vimur came about?
I started Vimur as a solo project in 2006. I had tried out a lot of different lineups and nothing ever really panned out for me. And I also, when I started it, so I took a little bit of a different approach. A lot of bands will release demos and EPs as they're like starting out. And I've always been a bit of a perfectionist and didn't want to release something under that name that I didn't think was up to the caliber. So, for example, the first album I recorded Traversing the Ethereal Current by myself on all instruments. And I wasn't happy with the outcome. So I deleted the whole thing and spent some time, a couple of years, just getting better at drums, getting better at guitar. And I re-recorded it later, and the outcome is, I'm happy with it. It was what I was looking to do. So, but basically it started as a solo project for years, and I was writing kind of silently, and I just would keep writing and always working on it, even if it wasn't, even if I wasn't releasing music or playing shows. But eventually it culminated into a full band with a live lineup in 2013. And so when that happened, we hit the ground running as far as playing shows and actually releasing the music. And now we have 3 full lengths out since then.
So I'd like to talk about your mentality when starting Vimur as a solo project. And this is something that occurs a lot in the US black metal scene. Why did you decide to start it off yourself first rather than try to find people to work with?
I didn't know anybody who was interested in black metal when I started Vimur, and I was a teenager when I started Vimur. So yeah, I had a couple friends who were into death metal, but they didn't really have any kind of interest in black metal, especially in any kind of serious way or in a philosophical way. And I was just being drawn to it. I was definitely into death metal before black metal, but once I heard it, it just kind of everything changed for me. And I was like, wow, I want to do this, and it doesn't matter. And I'd seen a lot of other black metal musicians that, did it themselves. And I was like, well, if they can do it, I can do it.
And you had your own home recording setup?
No, actually, I have a good friend who has a recording studio in his basement. And that's where the first album was recorded. It's at Dead Sound Studios in Kennesaw, Georgia. So the first album was recorded there, and the second one was recorded there. They were both mixed and mastered by Dan Klein at Iron Hand Audio in Chicago. So he put the finishing touches on that. But then we actually went to Chicago to record the third full-length Transcendental Violence. So basically, I just had one of my best friends do all the recording for me, and it's actually something I kind of regret is not being better and learning more about recording, just because I kind of took it for granted since I had a friend who was always there to do it,
Yeah. Okay. This is one of my theories about the US black metal scene, which is that it really took off when access to technology and home recordings software became much easier to get, much cheaper. And it allowed a lot of people who were in a situation such as yourself where they couldn't find like-minded musicians, and home recording allows people to write their own music without having to compromise to other people's tastes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. That definitely, recording has become so much easier and accessible over the years. And that's the other thing is with black metal is that you don't have to have the best quality if your music is good. If the spirit is there, if the intent is there, then you can get away with, what would be considered by a lot of people as bad production, which really is honestly oftentimes much better than like the big studios,
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, let's talk about the band. How did you find the other members?
Okay, so, the first album was myself on every instrument, guitar, bass, vocals, drums, and keys, and they're live drums. So that was only me. And then I got the guys into the band. And so the second full length album that's where the full band is. That's where I had a different drummer, different guitar player, or another guitar player and a bass player. So, but as far as how I found the lineup, Kehul, the bass player, he's an old friend of mine, and he's a phenomenal musician, one of the best bass players you'll ever come across. And, we've always been close. And so even though he was typically more drawn to death metal early on, he joined Vimur, and it's never been better since then. And then we had a couple guitar players in the early days that they were more session members, but they were still, friends of mine, guys that I could trust with the music, guys who would get the concepts, but were still doing their own thing. So, we went through a few before we got Australis, and he's been a phenomenal contributing member. He writes riffs, he's Excellent. I couldn't be happier with this lineup.
At this point, is the songwriting process more collaborative? Are the other members contributing a lot in terms of riffs and song structure ideas and things like that?
Yeah, definitely. So, it started off as just myself on the first album. And then the second album is myself and Kehul, who wrote that. And then the third features Australis with some of his riffing and some of his writing. So it's definitely become more collaborative. I do the bulk, but what those two guys bring to the table cannot be understated. They have written and contributed parts and ideas that blow my mind, and Vimur would not be the same band without them. So it has become more collaborative, and yeah, that's they're a big part of it.
Now, was there an adjustment period for you in terms of adapting to other people's contributions, or were you on board immediately?
There was a bit of an adjustment period, but I was also okay with it because I do feel like in the early days of Vimur, while I still stand by the first album and a lot of those old songs, it didn't have quite the focus that it has now. But I mean, that's very standard for a lot of bands, in their early days, trying to figure out who they are, what they're doing, what they're trying to say, and how they're going to say it. And so there was a little part of me, I was still figuring that out too early on. So I was happy to have them to contribute, and it was a little different. And I can be a bit of a perfectionist, or it has to be a certain way, but these guys they're incredible. So they're completely worthy. So yeah, even if it was a little different, I value it. And it's been definitely a positive decision.
How does the song start for you?
It's a good question. So oftentimes, not every time, but a lot of times I'll come up with a song title or a concept, something, and I think, okay, like, how do I want to convey this musically? And so then I'll start writing riffs. And when I write a riff, I know the drum beat that has to happen with it. Since I play drums too, it comes together quickly, because I think being a multi-instrumentalist, you hear in your head what the final outcome should probably be, rather than just a guitar player who's like, all right, I have a riff, but I don't really know what the drum should be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And especially for this type of music where the drums are so integral to the whole sound and the whole feeling, knowing what kind of drum patterns you want, or even what kind of blast you want, and what kind of cymbal fills or whatever can really shape your songwriting.
Yeah, I mean, just the difference between doing a blast beat on the hi-hat versus the ride cymbal can totally change the feel and texture of a song. So if I'm lucky to work with musicians that understand those kind of concepts and realize that sometimes it has to be a certain way. And they get that. We all get that. Because it's not about our individual egos or parts. It's about making the song the best it can be as a whole.